Hi, everyone. I'm so excited today to be talking with Katie Hyten. And so the City Biz audience can learn more about the extremely important work that Katie does as the co-executive director of Essential Partners. I've known Katie for quite a few years and have had the honor to experience firsthand some of the work she does. Katie has a master's degree in international negotiation and conflict resolution at the Tufts Fletcher School, and her research particularly addressed foreign policy and religious conflicts. Uh, During Katie's tenure at Essential Partners, she served as a program lead in the collaborations they do with local grassroots organizations across the country. And they've dealt with conflict resolutions on some of the most important issues facing our country today, including, but not limited to, the role of guns in American life, ethnic violence in our and civil society, racial and ethnic diversity, and most importantly, lately, especially campus inclusion and belonging, and so much more. But I want to get to the interview. So rather than go on and on with Katie's impressive resume, welcome, Katie. So glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's always lovely to get to see you.
Well, thank you. Uh, Maybe a best way to start would be a reflection. I mean, you've been with Essential Partners for quite a few years, but just looking back on this past year that just ended, all organizations in cultural or political reform have vast goals every year. But when you look back at your accomplishments in 2023, is there any particular of your so many events and programs that stand out as, wow, this exceeded our expectations and we're especially proud of what we accomplished and where this might head to?
I love that start. We love a good story at Essential Partners. And yes, we work at something like 40 or 50 institutions at the cornerstone of community life every year. But one thing that I just feel particularly proud of from 2023 is we've been working on a project that builds on deep institutional work that we've done for over 5 years in the Triangle area of North Carolina with community institutions, schools, with police. And we actually just recently received grant funding that allowed us to really deepen and broaden the impact that we've had within those institutions to really invest in our theory of change, where we believe that if institutions transform the way that they can engage their folks within their missions and then come together, they can actually build deeper ties that allow them to be more constructive at the community, town, city level around democratic norms and principles. New Pluralists had the vision to really invest in this work to help us disrupt the status quo. And we're really thrilled to partner with them on this project that includes students, educators, city leaders, community organizers, faith congregations, nonprofits, higher education, all these folks at the cornerstone of community life in North Carolina. So we believe that if we can transform these institutions to be more inclusive, more pluralistic, more democratic, then they can do the work. And we've started to see that actually after the events of October 7th. They were actually able to turn to each other when the city was wrestling with how to respond and how to support their communities. We had multiple folks saying, actually, we can pull these different actors in that we know from work that we've done in dialogue across the Triangle area to talk about a more cohesive, intentional, nuanced response to this really traumatic moment.
And when you go into a community or communities within North Carolina, who is the we that goes in? Who is your team? How do you reach out and get to know who your partners might be? Tell us a little about how your process of your theory of change, of making change on a community level works. Tell us a little more.
Oh my goodness. I love this question. It's something that we've worked really hard on. Something that makes Essential Partners a little bit unique is we were actually founded by family systems therapists. I love that part of our history because just like in families, communities are never going to eradicate difference or eradicate conflict. In your family, things will always come up that rub folks the wrong way or that cause some sort of conflict. But for as long as you choose to remain in a family, or as long as you choose to remain in community, your futures are intertwined in some way. And so what matters most to us is not inviting people to come to agreement or create common ground, but to build the infrastructure that allows people to bring their best selves to these processes so that people who are impacted most by decisions feel like their voices are heard, feel like they've been cared for, feel like they have a place. And so for how we work in a community, we really try only to come into places where people recognize that they want to do something differently. And they would like a little bit of help for how to do that on their own terms in ways that honor their own culture, their own norms, and their own best selves. So Essential Partners comes in. We have a team of about 10 staff and then another 15 or so project-based employees alongside 70 or so project-specific experts and consultants. And what we do is we do a lot of capacity building to help build the skills and build the knowledge to help people understand what are the cycles they're falling back into? What are the norms of polarization that are easy to devolve back into when things get tough? And then how do they begin to disrupt those? And then we do a lot of coaching and consulting. We do a lot of we do some direct facilitation work, but our goal is always for people to feel like they have the competence and confidence in their own community to have the conversations that matter most to them. So in terms of how we work in practice, we work in what we call the cornerstones of community life. So where community is already happening. We work in schools with school boards. We work on higher ed campuses, in faith congregations, in centers of civic life like YMCAs and libraries. And we help them identify what makes hard conversations challenging in their contexts and then shift them, not to necessarily come to common ground or agreement, but to figure out a shared future together.
Well, that's all very fascinating. It raises a lot of questions for me. And let me ask you something that might be helpful to our City Biz audience and a much wider audience that we hope to reach as well. When you had said several times, provide the infrastructure. And I'm trying to get a sense as to whether there's a nuance or not. When, in one sense, I'm hearing you say you provide um, the teaching, the learning, the skills. Perhaps that's a better word, the skills, so that members of the community can dialogue better and to deal with conflict resolution in a more effective way. But the infrastructure part is what I'm a little confused about. Does that mean after the citizens in the community, the people you engage with, learn these skills, you're still available? And you have, is that what you mean by infrastructure? You provided them something beyond the initial process, or am I totally off base on how I'm thinking about this?
No, I love that. It's a both and really for us. So for us, one of the things that we know to be true is if you teach an incredible person facilitation skills, listening skills, skills to ask deeper questions, they can do awesome work in their communities, right? They can also bump up against those cycles that are already in place that make dialogue difficult. So for example, you might do some incredible work to build skills in a teacher to help them have conversations across differences in their classrooms. But if they have a conversation and then they get in trouble for having that conversation, whether from parents or principals, it kind of stops that work right in its tracks, right? So you need to have some sort of ecosystem where positive engagement is affirmed, is invited, is rewarded. And so for us, it goes beyond just skill building, but it goes into helping create that ecosystem. So when we work in a school, we don't just train teachers. We also train students how to support conversations and facilitate conversations with younger students, even with parents. We invite students to actually lead conversations with parents about social and emotional well-being, about academic rigor, about race and equity in schools, about school safety, right? And then we bring in the school superintendent, and then sometimes the mayor comes in. And so you start to create a self-reinforcing cycle that's different than the one that was there before. So that's why our work tends to take place within these systems, within a systems lens, because it goes beyond for us just teaching skills and then wishing folks the best. It's making sure that they're set up for success, whatever that looks like for them.
Yeah. Well, I love that concept of an ecosystem. Uh, Without it, these could be very valuable efforts, but it could be a one-off. So by the creation of the ecosystem, the chances of it amplifying and scaling and being everlasting, which from the experience I've had with essential partners happens is much more likely to be reoccurring. I do have a question for you, which relates to a question I'm going through personally, being very involved in the democracy reform and cultural divide that's separating our country. I've been doing this for quite a few years, and I've always thought long term, we're not going to solve our problems tomorrow. But has your thinking or the thinking of essential partners changed at all for 2024 based on the election that is pending in November? And is there anything short term that you're working on, which might be a little different than your normal process of trying not to be month to month or even year to year? Has anything changed at all, or is your pattern pretty much the same?
I love that question. It's yes and no. So at Essential Partners, our focus is fundamentally on changing the ways people hold and navigate differences. That said, we have to meet people and the topics that matter most to them, that are top of mind. And the election is and will be on top of mind for a lot of people. It's going to impact so many things about our communities and our countries. We've worked on partisan differences since we were founded in 1989. So we have a ton of expertise. One of the things that we've done in the last few months is to really bolster our website with a ton of free resources to support people having conversations in their everyday lives and in their context that disrupt polarization, that invite new conversations about the election. And we're working with all of our partners and clients to make sure they feel equipped to support their communities in the tumultuous months to come, whatever those conversations look like. So yes, the thing we're most excited about is shifting the way that people do things in the long term. We also know that our democracy, our communities are not going to change overnight around a single election cycle. And the elections are a really important place to start to truly make a difference, because this election especially touches on so many things that people care deeply about.
Do you have a similar problem that so many other people I talk to in the field have of getting people interested? Do so many people hear what you have to say and say, "Oh, Katie, that makes a lot of sense," but the world's never going to change. You can never change anything. And how do you? Is there a pessimism out there that people just this is the way it is, or and how do you combat that, or is that pessimism just amongst a few, and generally most people really do want to be involved? How do you feel about that general question? That's a complicated.
So one of the things, it's a complicated question. One of the things that actually is a core value of ours uh, is the value of holding hope, whether people can or cannot hold that in their communities. That we believe that things can be different because we've seen it. So it's true that I think a lot of folks are feeling just incredibly demoralized right now in their communities. They feel unseen, they feel unheard, unrecognized. Uh, and, I think the thing that does bring a lot of people to our work and to this work is a desire for things to be different, right? A desire for the world to be different, for our communities to be different. And then I think our task at Essential Partners, in addition to doing the very tactical and tangible work of skill building, of supporting people with resources and examples, is to just offer them and reminders of that hope that things can be different. So in those dark moments where they're coming up against those things that have gotten in the way for so long, that we can be telling stories, we can be bringing folks together. I think more and more in our work, we're actually holding space for people to hear from each other about things they're doing differently. So, for example, just really recently, maybe a couple months ago, we offered our whole universe of alumni an opportunity to come together and hear from one of the people who's been doing this work for years in their community and just learn from them rather than from us, the experts, learn from other people who are doing this work. And we thought, maybe 20, 25 people might show up. We thought, we were like, this will be helpful for a few people. Over 100 people registered for this event. And we're not a big nonprofit, so I think we saw this, we're seeing people hungry for signs that things can be different. And I think that's what we try to grab onto when we work with folks. Even if they have trouble accessing that hope, we want them to know that, and we want to be sharing that things can be different. It doesn't have to be this way.
Well, I'm always looking for new ways to get people engaged. Most people have lives to live and they're not into the technical process of how government works. And one thing that I noticed on your website, maybe you could tell me a little about it, is an event I believe you have coming up real soon in Pittsburgh about voices through photos. And I'm a strong believer in connecting people to the work we do through the arts, through music, through dance, comedy, all the arts. Can you tell me a little about that event and how that is connected to the work you do?
It's a great question. I believe that the event that you saw is part of our collaboration with a modem called Photo Voice. And it's actually a really beautiful practice where people take photos within their community and then are able to articulate and tell stories about, what their experience in their community is like and what their hopes for their community are. And we've been working with uh, many, many partners to help kind of create a process that blends the work of dialogue, which tends to be mostly verbal, tends to be uh, a lot of talking in a circle, right? With this way of showcasing the visual aspect of this. And it's been so incredible. I mean, we've seen people around the country, even people in elementary school, use this and talk about what friendship means, right? Talk about what they want from their school friends, right? All the way up into imagining what a future for a community might look like. And so it's one of the things that has been, I think, most transformative for our work in the last few years is this combination of the arts and dialogue work, which is actually something, just as a side note, that I always recommend people think about is rather than, say, doing dialogue outside of your normal spaces, to embed it into your existing practices. So to help teachers help their students have conversations in their classrooms they couldn't have happen before is a whole lot of an easier ask than inviting people to, say, try this whole new thing over here in their free time.
Well, one example of how the arts was used to engage a whole generation of young black people into thinking about democracy was the show Hamilton. Rather than to have a lecture on democracy, this show used hip hop to excite and engage a generation through music into caring about and understanding our democracy. So I see your approach as similar in that respect. Well, we're running out of time. I guess a couple of questions though. When you were a young lady in college, did you envision this as your life's mission? Was this, or even before that, in elementary school or high school, was this something about your life experience, your family experience, your group experience that led you to this life endeavor?
Oh, I love these questions that you're asking, and certainly for myself, and I think I love the way in which people's lives intersect with where they are today. For myself, I grew up in a military family, and I think that really first and foremost influenced my career in a couple of ways. First, I mean, I had the direct experience of moving around a lot and constantly feeling like an outsider who had to work to understand the hidden norms and cultures and expectations of each school and community I moved into. And I still feel that pull to make those hidden norms more clear, more explicit, more inclusive, more pluralistic for people like me who feel like the outsider, right? But I think second, on a more macro level, and something that really informed my early career, especially that was mentioned earlier around my interfaith and religious conflict work. My dad was stationed in the Pentagon on 9/11, and for me, that event felt deeply personal. It was about my family, my dad. I still remember phone lines being down while he struggled to call the people on his team to make sure everyone was okay, and working for hours just to try to get through to people as we watched the 24/7 news coverage. And so while this personal event was happening for me and my family, for this whole world, it felt political, and it felt like overnight the world divided across identities and politics in ways that actually often didn't really connect with my own personal experience of what was happening. And so one of the things that I really love is that now I get to work at Essential Partners, where we try really hard to bring those two pieces together, to connect the personal and the political, to make more informed, more inclusive policies, even in really deeply hard and traumatic moments.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for your time. Um, let's plan on doing this again in 2 years, because I think we can put to rest some of what the naysayers say, who say that change can never happen, and we're all wasting our time. I'm sure 2 years from now, we'll have a plethora of stories, of great success stories, of how your work is going to greatly impact our society for years and years and generations to come. So thank you so much for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, David. This has been a really lovely conversation, and I'm already looking forward to the next one.
Take care. Goodbye.